So let's talk about what the process is of building your campaign. Really, there's 8 elements of it. Number one, make sure that you got your tools organized right from the beginning. And we'll talk about what that is in a minute. Make sure you know what you're shooting for. What is your retention target? What are we trying to accomplish here as an association? You want to make sure that you've got your timing laid out. So you've got different stages of your campaign. What is the timing for each stage of the campaign? When are you going to begin it? When are you going to end it? You want to know what your pitch is. What is your pitch for renewal? That's got to be written down and articulated. And then you're going to need collateral. And collateral is everything that you're going to use around it. That's your pitch. That's your phone scripts, everything that you need to support the process. You're going to make sure that you need to have accountability. And accountability means that certain people have certain responsibilities for that campaign. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Ideally, you want to have incentives. You don't want your member renewal campaign to be dragging on forever. So the faster you get people to renew, the better off you are and everybody else is. So think about what kind of incentive can we offer to get people to renew early, or at least to renew on time and not procrastinate. The final stage that we need metrics and we need tracking. So what you want here is, just like with any campaign, especially one that you're going to be doing year after year, is track what your accomplishments were at each stage of the campaign. So when it comes next year, we can say, well, normally at this time, we have this percentage of our members renewed. Right now, we have more than that. We have less than that. Is there something that we need to tweak here? So you need tracking and metrics. So those 8 elements are all part of building and executing your campaign. So first, let's talk about the tools. These are the tools that you need. You need an association management system that's going to help make this easy for you. You also need to make sure that you've got a flawless online experience. And typically these two things are connected. I often hear from people, well, the association management system we're using, it's not all that good, but we really can't afford all that much. So, we have to do a lot of manual stuff with our system. It's not all that great. Keep in mind that the more manual time that your team is taking to do something that you could have got from a better and perhaps more expensive association management system may be false economy. If it's going to cost you another $100 a month to get a much better association management system, and it's going to save you hours of staff time, remember, your members don't value the tedious time that your staff are taking to do something manually that could have been automated. They don't get any value out of that. All you're doing is saving money. And if you could spend that time actually doing something that your members value, you might actually increase your member retention rate just by doing that. So don't fall into the trap of false economy when it comes to your association management system. Get something that's really going to do the job for you. And when we say a flawless online experience, we want to make sure that it is so simple for people to renew, that it's just one click, a minute or so, and they're done. And they get used to that it's not going to be a long drawn out process. It's something really simple to do. Make sure, and we talked earlier about accountability. Have you figured out who the staff members are who are going to be involved in this and what their roles are, who the volunteers are that are going to be involved and what their roles are? That's part of your toolbox. And then make sure that you know what your targets are. That's part of your toolbox, having targets, and what you're going to be doing about reporting and to whom. And by the way, when we talk about reporting, this annual member renewal campaign is something that everybody should be involved in, all levels, and that includes the CEO. Now, when it comes to your targets, the most important thing to remember is we want to have targets that are higher than they were last year. So we're always trying to get higher. What is your member retention rate? Is it 70%, 80%, 90%? We're always wanting to increase from where it was last year and to have a plan to do it. If our member retention rate is 85% right now, we don't want to just pick a number out of the air and say, okay, it's going to be 95%. Well, fine, let's pick 95%, but how are we going to get there? If it was only 85% last year, what are we doing to increase it by that extra 10%? So increase it, have a plan to increase it, and figure out how you're going to get there. Now, in addition to your targets, you also need to focus on timing. So think about how many communications you're going to be putting out. What is the nature of that communication? Is it a voicemail? Is it an email? What is the date on which that's going to happen? Regardless of whether you've got an association management system that you can automate for specific dates, you want to make sure that you've got hard deadlines to do things so that this is happening in a very fluid and well-planned manner. You also want to make sure that your renewal emails, you're coordinating that with the other messaging that's going out. So you don't want any blips because a message came out which is inconsistent with the renewal message that just came out 5 minutes ago. We'll talk about concurrent messaging in a couple of minutes, but this is an important consideration when you're planning your campaign. Now, also in terms of timing, make sure you give yourself enough time to do a really good job of this. At this moment, what I'm talking about right now is organizations that have an annual renewal date. So in other words, every single year, everybody expires at exactly the same time. Now, if you have a situation where it's anniversary date, and we'll talk about that in a minute, where everybody has a different anniversary date, then basically what you've got is you've got to have a year-round renewal campaign where you're managing to each of those dates. Now, in my opinion, and based on my experience, that's a lot more work. But regardless, whether it's throughout the year or whether it's once a year, you want to make sure that you're planning well in advance in a period of time where you've got the time to put some effort into this. Remember, no matter when you do it, it's going to take the same amount of time. So try to do it when you've got the time to do it properly. I find that a 90-day cycle works best. And by 90 days, I mean you want to start the campaign 60 days before expiry and complete the major part of the campaign 30 days after expiry. Now, you're still going to be continuing to communicate to people after that, but that's after they've already expired and you're putting them back into the nurture element of your campaign. Now, over that 90-day cycle, you're going to want to be sending out messages around about every 2 weeks, but you're probably going to want to ramp up as you approach and exceed the expiry date. So that's going to be anywhere between, say, 6 to 9 emails. Now, make sure it's not the same darn email each time. That's just boring for people. And if they ignored the first one, they're definitely going to ignore the second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth if it looks exactly the same. So make sure that each one is slightly different and it's escalating. So gosh, we're getting awfully close to the expiry date. I hope you're going to continue to join us and you're going to take advantage of all these great things that are coming up. Make sure in that 90-day cycle, you're not only talking about the emails that are going out, but what's going on in your social platforms. Make sure that everybody's aware it's renewal season. It's just another way of reminding them to make sure that something is in their inbox and to pay attention to it. Now, at some point, not everybody's going to renew just based on the e-blast that you send out. You will probably need to do phone calls. And in an ideal world, it's not just your staff, but it's also your volunteers that are doing those follow-up phone calls. So that's going to happen as we get closer to the expiry date. Make sure that you've got everything ready in advance. You've got your tools all lined up. They're all ready to go. Your collateral's all lined up. It's ready to go. Your timing is ready. And make sure that your termination schedule is very, very well communicated. It should be on your website and it should be in everything that you send out in your membership renewal campaign. So I often hear with boards, well, I don't want a hard cutoff date. You know, I'm sure Erin will renew if we just keep giving her a little bit more time. But, you know, the problem is if Erin hasn't renewed 4 months after expiry and you're still giving Erin membership privileges, first of all, it begs the question, who's a member and who's not? And secondly, what about all those people that did pay on time? You're really trivializing the effort that they put into to be good members and to pay attention to the expiry date. So make sure that your termination schedule is real. I encourage you to have that in your bylaws. You'll often find boards saying, well, you know what, if we're too hard deadline about terminating people, we don't want to tell people they're terminated. That's just unpleasant language. And we're just worried that if we do that, people will get pissed off and they won't bother to renew at all. You know, what I found is that if you're strict about termination, it is actually a very effective way to get people to step up and do it. I've not ever found in all the associations we've worked with and all the boards we've worked with that having a clear cutoff was a reason for people not to renew. In fact, quite the opposite. So make sure people understand, and ideally it's in your bylaws, that they've got a maximum of 30 days after that expiration date. And after 30 days, they got no more membership privileges. They are cut off from the communications, and the only communication they're going to get from you is the communication you've already planned with respect to your nurture campaign. So make sure people are very clear on what termination means and when it happens. And if you can get it in your bylaws, and here's why I want to encourage it, then there's really no debate about it. If anybody says, well, what do you mean 30 days? That's not enough. You can say it's in our bylaws. We are compelled to follow our bylaws, and our bylaws say we have to cut off people who are not paid 30 days after expiry date. So it just makes it very clear what the rules of engagement are. Now, let's keep in mind what we want to have in our renewal pitch. Remember, this is a pitch. It's not just a reminder, oh, by the way, it's time for you to send your money in again. This is a pitch to convince people why they should renew. So remember, your renewal campaign is a marketing effort and it's a sales effort. So think of it that way. This is what you're doing. It's marketing and sales. Keep in mind, as you're putting together your campaign, you may need to do something different for your member segment. So if you've got core members and then you've got supplier members, you might need to have different language for your suppliers than you do for your core members. So think about the members that you've got and how you're going to appeal to them in your pitch. Now, the biggest mistake that I see when I look at renewal pitches is it does not get to the point quickly enough. You know, you have to scroll down past the fold on the page before you actually get to the link for how you're going to renew your membership. Keep in mind, there's going to be a certain percentage of people who know they want to renew. They're happy to do it right away. Don't make them read down. If they know they want to renew, right in the first line, there should be the link for them to go ahead and renew. Make it really simple. For the ones that are going to do it quickly, don't make them scroll down. Give them the link right away and they're good to go. For others, they can scroll down and find out more, but make sure you get to the point really, really quickly. Don't preamble, get to the point. Then provide your explanatory information. And in your explanatory information, you want to make sure you're making reference to your member value proposition. What is the reason why people are members after all? Remind them of that. Also, make sure they know what's coming up in the year ahead. If they don't renew, what are they going to be missing? Make sure you're telling them that so they have something to look forward to. And also give them a couple of highlights of the current year. You know, we in the association, we assume that people read all of our emails, but we really know that they don't. And people forget our wins so quickly. You know, if we had a win in the last 3 months, there's a reasonably good chance that a good chunk of our members have completely forgotten about it. And people forget about wins a lot faster than they forget about you not doing something for them. A little slight or not responding to them in a timely manner, or being perceived to be brushing them off. People will remember that for months, if not years. But a win that you have accomplished on behalf of everybody just kind of ends up going by the way. So you got to remember to remind people, by the way, we did some great stuff together this year, and make sure it's about what we did together, not about what association staff did, but stuff that we did together. Now, in terms of the collateral, you're going to need a lot of different things to be lined up in advance. You want to make sure that for each communication, and remember that's 6 to 9 communications, and they're all going to be slightly different. You need email content for each of those. So you want that organized in advance. You need your event calendar. That's something that you're going to have on your website and that you're going to link to from that renewal campaign email. So make sure you've got that lined up. Now, I often hear people say, well, I've got no idea what I'm going to do next year. I mean, I can't give you 12 months in advance. You know what? You can. You may not have the dates. You may not have all the speakers for events, whether it's a professional development event or whether it's a conference, but you know roughly what time of year it's going to happen, and you know roughly what it is. So we're going to have the summit with this theme in Q1 of next year. We're going to have our AGM and our events award ceremony is going to be in June. We're going to have our conference in the fall. Make sure people know and have some idea about why it's going to be a little bit different than it was this past year. You're also going to need that when it comes time to do your voicemail follow-up, as we approach the expiry date or we're just past it, we make sure that we've got speaking points. So don't have people pick up the phone and then stumble to try to figure out what they're going to say. Make sure that you've got all the speaking points that they have to make in their voicemail. And then once they've done that voicemail, make sure that you have a template for an email follow-up. So if I'm picking up the phone and saying, hey, Bob, I know expiry date is approaching the next couple of days. I really hope that you're going to renew with us. But if you've got any questions, just pick up the phone and let me know. Don't stop there. Remember, you didn't get hold of Bob. Follow up with an email immediately thereafter. Hey, Bob, I just sent you an email hoping you're going to renew again with us and with us. And by the way, here's the link. If you just leave a voicemail, then Bob's going to go back in his emails and try to find the link that you sent to him. That means it's going to be more time that Bob has to take. But if you've got an immediate follow-up in the email that you send, it makes it really simple for Bob. So remember, you want to make sure that for those people who actually want to renew, keep it super simple for them and for everyone else for that matter. Also keep in mind invoices. If you're members or corporations, they probably need an invoice to pay a bill. It might be that they can do it by credit card and they don't need an invoice, but the vast majority do now. So again, save a step for people. Don't have them send a message back to you saying, yeah, I do want to renew. Could you please send me an invoice? Save them that step. Get all your invoices lined up in advance. Get your accounting team to get those invoices organized so that when I get that renewal email, it's got my own invoice attached to it. All I need to do is to flip that to accounts payable, and they've got everything they need to make it happen. So keep it simple. Make a little bit more effort up front for you and your renewal campaign to make it easier for your members to renew. Now, in your collateral, you also want to make sure that you're thinking about what are the events that are going to be happening around about the time that you're doing this renewal campaign. Have you got a conference coming up? Have you got a professional development event coming up? Are you not launching a new member program where there's going to be some announcements happening and there's going to be some email advice about what's coming up? Make sure that you've got speaking notes or notes to attach to your email around the time of those events that said, oh, by the way, you're going to need to be a member to take part in this. And if you haven't renewed yet, here's the link to renew. Make sure that your website is up to date. I find that often associations do a really great job of getting things organized, but they forget something on the website. Make sure that you've taken the opportunity to examine your website. Everything there is up to date. People might decide before they make a decision whether they're going to renew or not to go back and look at the benefits on the member website. So make sure that's up to date. Anything to do with membership is fully up to date. Anything for your events for the upcoming year is fully up to date. And right on that website, on the membership page and on the front page, you're giving them the renewal call to action. Hey, we're in renewal season right now. Here's the way to renew, and here's why you should renew. Now, let's keep in mind, we don't have a campaign unless it's documented. Something that's just in somebody's head is not a campaign, it's just an idea. So you want to make sure that this is all documented. What's going to be done, what date, what exact date is that going to be done, who's going to do it, and make sure in that folder where you've got your campaign materials and your checklist is the collateral that you use this year. So next year, all you need to do is look at what you used last year and tweak it for next year. Any notes that you've got from last year's campaign, make sure that's in the folder as well. So you've got a reminder to say, by the way, let's try this next year. And here's what our metrics were. By this date, we had this number of percentage of members that had renewed. By this date, this number of members. So make sure that you're tracking that so you know what the timing is and what's actually working so you know what you can tweak for next year. Now, we talked earlier about accountability. Nothing gets done unless people are accountable for it. So make sure that you've got somebody who's going to be the team lead on member retention. Give this the same level of attention that you would to a conference. You're going to pay a lot of attention to your event manager when you're doing a conference, just like you're going to pay a lot of attention to your campaign manager when you're doing your member renewals. Make sure that you know what your targets are and that everybody that's involved in this is on tune and on speed to know exactly what their role is and what we're trying to accomplish. Keep in mind, this is not something that one person's going to be doing. It's going to take a real team effort. So make sure that you've cleared the decks in terms of what's on everybody's plate right now. So they're not trying to do everything that they would otherwise be doing 6 months earlier on top of the member renewal campaign. Clean their plates. Keep in mind they're going to be busy doing this and give them the time to make it happen. Now, I just want to touch briefly on compensation here. In some cases, we've got organizations that will provide bonuses on the basis of performance. And I've seen bonuses for many different reasons, but sometimes I see bonuses that are based on new member attraction. And I just want to draw your attention to the fact that compensation is highly motivating for people, so much so that it will meaningfully influence the way that they do their job. So keep in mind, if you're giving people a bonus for the number of new members that came in, but you're not giving them a bonus for how many, for what the retention rate is, it's going to lead to bad practices. Because what it means is mentally, your staff are going to be focused on what it takes to bring a new member in the door. They're not going to be focused on what it takes to hold on to a member. If you are compensating them on the retention rate and how well they hold on to members, it's really an end-to-end solution. They understand that that means picking up the phone, responding promptly, keeping people happy, doing a really good membership renewal campaign. If you're going to give them performance compensation, focus on the things that make you the most sustainable. If you can get to 100% renewable, or if you can get to 100% retention, that's huge. And it's a huge, huge element of sustainability. If we are constantly trying to bring new members in, but we're not doing a great job of it, we're just doing whatever we can to get a new member, generally speaking, we're going to lose a lot of them after the first year. So holding on to the ones that you've got is exceptionally important. And if you're going to give performance bonuses, tie it to that. Now, let's talk about incentives. Remember, what you're trying to do here is make people make a positive decision very early in the undertaking. Give them a reason not to procrastinate. So if you can give them an incentive to renew early, or at least renew before the expiry date, give them a financial incentive to do that. Now, if your member dues automatically go up by the inflation rate every year, it's very simple to say, look, if you renew before the expiry date, you can get in at this past year's rate. If you renew after the expiry date, you're going to be renewing at the rate for this year. So give people a little bit of leeway in terms of what you're doing for them. Give them a reason to renew. Now, if you don't do an increase every year, then you're only going to be able to do this on those occasions when you do increase your fees. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But try to give them some incentive to renew early. But keep in mind, if you are dealing with members whose fees are paid by their employers, this is going to be less of an incentive, because keep in mind, ultimately, they're not paying the fee. So if they end up paying after the renewal date and they don't get the incentive, what does it matter? It's not coming out of their pocket. So keep in mind, you've got to put the incentives in front of the people who are actually paying the bills. So if it's the member that is getting the message to renew, but it's their boss that's actually paying for the membership, think about what you can do that's going to incentivize that individual member to make sure that the payment happens early, or at least on time. Now, when it comes to tracking, and remember, tracking and metrics are super important. I find with associations, this is one thing that we don't tend to do very well. You don't want to end up in a situation where, wow, I'm pretty sure at this year last time we had a lot more members that are renewed, but that's anecdotal. You don't really know whether it's true or not. You want to be doing a really thorough, good job of tracking. So you want to know what happened this year. By what date did you have this number of members renewed? What were you doing around about that time? What was the messaging that actually gave you a pop in your membership renewals? Keep in mind, did you do something last year that resulted in a renewal spike? If so, what was it? Maybe it's something that you want to do again. When it comes time to planning this year's campaign, think about trying something else new and see if you actually get a pop. If you don't get a pop, then try something else next year. Also keep in mind, if you do get a pop that you can't explain by anything that you were doing in the member renewal campaign, can you explain it by something that was going on in the industry or that related to your sector? Was there a government announcement that happened? Make sure that you're on top of this stuff so that you know any external influences as well as internal campaign influences that make people decide that they want to renew. Now, in terms of the renewal process, let's summarize it. We've talked about all the things that you want to do for your renewal campaign. Let's go through a summary. First of all, let's talk about preparation. I mentioned earlier that I find what works best is if we have a 90-day cycle. So remember, we're starting 60 days before expiry, and we're ending the official renewal campaign 30 days after expiry. So that's a 90-day process. I find it's best to start well in advance. So if you're going to kick off your campaign 60 days before renewal, 2 months before renewal, start doing your preparation about 4 months ahead of time, or as early in the process as you have time to do it. Remember, a good chunk of what you're doing here for preparation is not going to be any different 4 months ahead than it's going to be 2 months ahead. So doing it early is not a bad thing. Make sure that you've got all your tools lined up. Remember, this is going to be a documented process, so you should have a checklist of things to follow. Make sure that you look at the results that you had last year, do any tweaks that you think are appropriate, and make sure you've assigned accountability. Make sure that you've got all your outreach dates are calendarized. These are hard dates that are going to happen here. And make sure that you've got your content all ready and that you've included your member value proposition in your content. Make sure your website's totally up to date. Make sure that you've thought about incentives that are going to be relevant and meaningful and perhaps have stood the test of time because they've worked in the past. And make sure that you know what your metrics are and you're tracking your results. So In terms of your membership campaign, those are the elements you want to be thinking about. Now, I also want you to be thinking about concurrent messaging, because of course you don't want the lights to go out while you're doing your member renewal campaign. You don't want it to be the case that for 60 or 90 days, all your members are seeing from you are increasingly more urgent messages to renew your membership. You want to make sure that they know other stuff is going on at the same time. So think about staging your other messaging to be in line with the timing of your renewal campaign. Make sure that while they're getting your exhortations to renew, they're also getting messages about, hey, here's some priorities that we've got ready to go for next year. Oh, by the way, just a reminder of this win that we had this year and how we're going to be building on it and leveraging it for next year. Make sure that you've got really good messages that are coinciding in and around the time of your request for renewals. And make sure that you've got internal accountability for this messaging. You want to be thinking of this just like you would any other marketing campaign. First of all, there's stuff that we need to do to remind members to renew. Then there's other stuff that we need to do to be communicating with our members to let them know what's going on. Now let's structure this in the optimal manner to make them happy, to make them satisfied about being a member, and to remind them to renew. So make sure that you've got all of that going on in terms of your concurrent messaging. That is all part of a continuum. Now, we talked earlier about your AMS. Having a good association management system, by that, I mean a good association management system for you. Keep in mind your staff time. If they're doing a lot of manual work, that is of no value to your members. Your members don't appreciate how much stuff you're doing manually because you don't have a good association management system. At a minimum, you want an association management system that you can auto send. So you can get all of your messaging lined up and then pick the exact date and time that it's going to go out the door, just like you would with regular email blast software. One other thing to keep in mind, and I find that a lot of AMSs don't easily allow you to do this, you want to make sure that your system will automatically filter out people that have paid before it sends the next message out. Now, some association management systems are fine at doing that once the expiry date has come. But before that, they cannot distinguish in the campaign between people that have paid and people haven't. And this is super important. Even if you've got to do this manually, please do it, because there's nothing more annoying than paying your fee, you've paid on time or you've paid early, and you're still getting messages to pay. That just reeks of bulk email that is not customized. Once you've paid, you don't want to be receiving any more messages. So make sure you've got an association management system that will filter out the people that have paid. Figure out how to do it, and hopefully it's going to be easy so that every 2 weeks when you're doing this messaging, you don't have to go and do stuff manually. Because remember, anything you're doing manually is not only time consuming, but it's also prone to error. And you can get people that get really miffed when they're getting a message that says it's time for you to pay when they already have. And you don't want to go all mealy-mouthed and saying, if you have not paid yet, that implies that you don't know that I've paid. Well, then how much attention are you paying to me? Think about that. Now, let's make sure that we're using all of our resources really effectively. Now, it doesn't matter whether you've got a staff of 200 or you've got a staff of 1. The process is pretty much the same. But if you've only got 1 staff member and they're doing everything from being an executive director through to picking up the mail, you're going to have to delegate more to volunteers than would otherwise be the case. But let's assume you've got the basic staff covering the basic roles. You want your staff to do the automations on your association management system, to write the collateral. You want to make sure that they have got all the postings ready for your social platforms. And you want to make sure that your staff are doing your round 1 phone calls. Now, phone calls, you're going to save this for the end, when people have had plenty of opportunity to renew, but they just have not done it yet. You want to be picking up the phone and making those calls. And I do understand if you've got thousands of members, it's harder to make those phone calls. But if you wait until the expiry date, you're not going to be calling all thousands of them. It's going to be a much smaller group of people. So you want your staff doing those follow-up phone calls in round 1. And for those phone calls, remember, part of your collateral is going to be, what are the speaking points for the phone calls, and what have you got in your follow-up email template? You want to make sure that your volunteers are now doing your round 2 and potentially your round 3 phone calls. And there's a reason for this. First of all, your members have more credibility when they pick up the phone, because as staff members, you have less credibility because you're getting paid to say it's a good thing to renew your membership. It's much better if I get a call from one of my peers saying, hey, Aaron, why haven't you signed up for membership? First of all, I might feel a little bit guilty. But when my peer is telling me that they value their membership, that's of more value to me. That has more credibility to me. So it's important that you get volunteers involved in this exercise. And also it helps them to understand the amount of work that it takes to actually put together a good member renewal campaign. And they might have some good ideas. When they get through to somebody, they might find somebody says, you know what, I didn't receive any of your messages. I didn't start receiving any messages until the expiry date had already happened. Well, that gives you some clues. So think about how you're going to use your volunteers effectively, but minimally. Get them involved when it's the right time to get them involved. And by the way, use the right people for the right job. Don't pick volunteers to pick up the phone from that group of people that are introverts and don't like picking up the phone. Because often people will say, yeah, I'll do that, but it's not something that they enjoy doing. So they'll procrastinate, which means everybody on their call list did not get the call because they just didn't want to do it. So vet your volunteers, get people to pick up the phone who like picking up the phone, who like talking to people, who have relationships with the maximum number of people. And keep in mind, often this is supplier members. Often the people that are your supplier members, they're in sales. That's what they're there to do. They've got a list of people as long as your arm that they know and have good relationships with, and they really like picking up the phone. So pick the right people. Make sure that the volunteers you've got are the right people to be picking up the phone. Now, I just want to talk quickly about annual renewals versus anniversary renewals. If you've got a situation where everybody's membership expires at exactly the same time, that's an annual renewal. And for that, you put together one campaign every year, one single member renewal campaign, starts 60 days before, finishes 30 days after. It's going to take a lot of staff time during that period of time, and you're probably going to need to park some other things while you do that, but you only need to do it once a year. If you've got anniversary renewals, it means this is going on throughout the entire year. And I really find it's much harder to track your metrics and also to get people kind of involved and engaged in the process if you're doing it throughout the entire year. So just something to think about. There are ways to transition relatively easily from anniversary to annual. It's not a big deal. But just think about it. I know there's arguments for having it on an anniversary basis, well, it doesn't mean that we're putting all of this effort at one time of the year, but you're still putting the same amount of effort into it over the course of the year. And I just find it seems to work better if you've got one campaign a year. Now, keep in mind, as you're putting together your collateral, you want to make sure that you're always demonstrating your member value proposition. And keep in mind, it's tempting when you're putting together a renewal campaign to focus on all the things that you do for your members, which is just a list of stuff we do. It doesn't tell me as a member what's in it for me. What am I going to be losing if I don't renew my membership? Why should it matter to me? It's all about answering that question, what's in it for me? What bad things are you going to make go away for me in the next year? Or what pain are you going to mitigate? How are you going to do that? What are the things that I want, that I really, really want, that you're going to help me to do that I can't do on my own? And keep in mind, this is a good time every year when we do our member renewals to think about what we can do to increase our member value. And by the way, if you haven't taken the time to sit down with your board and with your senior and junior team members, in other words, everybody that is outward facing for your organization, if you haven't taken the time to sit down and figure out exactly what your member value proposition is, then make time. It's a process. It's going to take time. It's something that you've got to do internally. This is not something that you can hire some marketing person to write for you. This is something that you have to feel, that you have to experience, and you need to have the people for whom it is meaningful come up with it. Now, I talked earlier about rate increases. You need to be increasing your rates on a regular basis because the cost of your staff members, the cost of everything that you buy and use in your association increases over time. And I just find it's a lot easier to have a membership that increases at the rate of inflation every single year. If you can get that put into your bylaws, it makes it simple. The board doesn't even have a discussion about it. It is all delegated to the staff. They know how to calculate CPI. That is something that's done in advance. And it's very simple. Make sure your members have got that communicated to them once the board has made the decision. Communicate to your members that as per every year, it goes up by the CPI rate. And remind people every year when it comes to the renewal time, remind them, by the way, as always, to make sure that we are covering our costs and we can continue to deliver value to you, the rate this year will be going up by the inflation rate. And by the way, if you renew before the expiry date, you can get in at this year's rate. Now, if that's not the way you operate, and you do have reason to have a more hefty increase every few years, make sure you give people plenty of notice. The time to communicate a 15% increase is not right now when the membership is actually due. If you're going to have a meaningful increase, make that decision a year ahead of time and make sure you're communicating with them throughout the year. By the way, it's been time. It's a long time since we've had a membership fee increase. It's time to do that increase. And we're going to have a renewal campaign as usual, starting in November. If you would like to get in early at this year's rate, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure if you're going to have a meaningful rate increase, don't do it at the last minute. Give them plenty of notice. So by the time it actually comes time to renew, that new member rate is seared into their mind. They understand, it's on the website. It's very clear to them. Don't give people negative surprises, especially when it comes to money. Give them plenty of notice. So in summary, make sure you build your campaign. That's super critical. Think about what the concurrent messaging is going to be while you're executing your campaign. Make sure you got an association management system that makes things simple for you and simple for your members. Make sure you're using your most valuable resources, which are your staff and your volunteers, to their maximum effectiveness. Make sure that you're using your member value proposition in your campaign. Make sure that you've got a plan for rate increases. So that concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. Now we're going to open it up to live Q&A. What's our first question, Kevin?
Thank you, Erin. So our first question is, what are some of the platforms that you've seen that can simplify and automate the renewal process?
Okay, good question. And I often get asked this question, what association management system would you recommend? And I certainly haven't tried all of them. Our team has tried a number of them. And the one that we've found the best luck with so far is Member 365. But that doesn't mean that that's for you. So we have no relationship with Member 365 to be plugging it. What I do encourage you to do is to ask other people. Ask other associations that are doing similar things to what you're doing, or maybe the same size. Keep in mind the type of membership you've got. If you've got individual members versus corporate members, you may need a different type of AMS, because often something that caters to individual members does not cater well to company members, where you may have multiple points of contact for that company member. So keep that in mind. Ask other associations. I do, and I see this, by the way, if you're a member of CSAE, I see this question in the discussion forum quite regularly, and you'll often get some good feedback if you go to the discussion forum and say, here's the kind of association I am. If you're like me, or you can make a recommendation, please let me know what you're using. And you'll also find usually that the salespeople for various AMSs will also weigh in on those discussion forums as well. And that can give you an opportunity to find out what else is out there.
Great answer, Erin. Very thorough for sure. Second question is, we are considering adding a 3-question satisfaction survey after members renew this year. Is that appropriate?
I think that's an awesome idea. It's a great way of doing a couple of things. Number one, they've already renewed, so you're reinforcing the engagement connection. Hey, thanks so much for renewing. Just want to make sure that you get the maximum value for your membership this year. Let's give us some information to share. And 3 simple questions that are easy to answer that they can do in about 10 seconds. That's the kind of thing that you're looking for. Make it super simple for them. And what that means is, from a metrics perspective, it means you're getting the answers to those 3 questions every single year. And now you can track how you're doing each year. And you can also combine your metrics from your member renewal campaign to your metrics that are coming out of those 3 satisfaction questions. So I love the idea, strongly encourage you to do it. Just make it super simple that they can do in 10 seconds or less.
All right. Perfect. So third question, how do we make membership renewal more appealing, as it is almost automatic but not required?
Okay, what I think I hear you saying is your membership is voluntary. However, we do tend to have a fairly high retention rate. And what can we do to make it something other than a bore? What can we do to make it a little bit more appealing? If that's what you're asking, then think about what you can be giving to members on renewal. Maybe you can have a little contest every year. Maybe it'll be, and this could fall into the category of incentives as well too. You know, everybody that renews before the expiry date, there's a draw for some prize, and that prize goes to the individual. So keep in mind, if it's a company, if your employer is paying your member rate, giving them a discount on next year's renewal rate is not going to mean much to them. But if you give them an opportunity to win something, a gift card or something along those lines, that's something personal that gives them an incentive and makes it a little bit more fun. If they are paying it themselves, then think about early renewal incentives like we talked about before. You can get in at last year's rate, or maybe give them a discount to a member program that costs something for members to be part of. So think about cash incentives if people are paying their own way, and think about other incentives if their employers are. One thing I think is nice to have is member badges. So give them something that they can put in their email signature that says, you know, I'm a member, and put the year in it. So every year they're getting a new member badge that they can change in their signature. It's a small thing, but you're giving them something. And if it's a company that has bricks and mortar and they have doors that are open to the public, think about giving them maybe a decal that they can put on the outside of their door, or a wall plaque that they can put in the foyer of their business. Think about what kinds of things you could give them that are going to make them feel like they're getting something in return for getting their membership renewed, other than the value of the membership itself.
Thank you, Erin. Next question is, are there any examples of renewal letters / templates that you would recommend?
Short answer is no. You want to make sure that your renewal templates are very, very personalized to you as an association. This is not something that you want to go onto Mr. Google and find a renewal template. Certainly I've never found anything that I thought I would want to use. But keep in mind, get to the point really, really quickly. Explain very quickly why they want to become members, which is basically, this is what's coming up next. That's the most important thing. Here's some wins that we want to build on. Here are some priorities. Now, if you want some help wordsmithing that, maybe talk to somebody who's good at copywriting, but make sure that you talk to somebody who's really got writing skills. Once you've got that done once, then all you need to do is to tweak it every single year. But the short answer is no. You want to make sure that this is customized for you as an organization, because that's the meaningful part. You don't want to make this look like a cut and paste.
All right, so next question is actually not necessarily for you, Erin, but I'm not sure if the person who asked the second question about the three question satisfaction survey is on the webinar right now, but there is another attendee who's asking if they could just take a quick look at those three questions, because they're trying to find out what you are trying to discover after renewal.
Well, what I would suggest is I will certainly weigh in on that. And if any of the other attendees would like to type into chat who are doing this, if you'd like to share any survey questions that you're using right now, please feel free to type into chat. But just in terms of survey questions, one thing you want to be asking for sure is, what is your level of satisfaction with your membership? And then maybe another question might be, what do you value most about your membership? Often the answer to that question is something that you would absolutely not expect. So something along those lines of, how satisfied are you? What do you value most about your membership? And one thing about member satisfaction, asking you how satisfied you are on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 3 is one thing. But if you ask them, how likely are you to recommend that a colleague join the organization, that is a much different question to ask, and a much more important question to ask. So consider those questions.
Thank you, Erin. I believe that's all in terms of questions.
Wonderful. Well, if you'd like some help moving forward, think about your member value proposition. If that's something that you'd like some help with, think of us. And if you'd like a review of your renewal process, we can come in, we can look at what your renewal process looks like, make some suggestions for what your collateral should look like and what your renewal template should look like. Please consider joining us for our next webinar, which is going to be on November 17th. And on November 17th, we're going to be talking about creating and using effective policies. So we're going to talk a lot about what kind of policies you need, what are the minimum policies you need, and what are you trying to accomplish with them. Thanks very much, and we look forward to seeing you next month.